The sweetest part was the first sign. In the end, I'll tell you the sentence I wish I had said. Dear daughter, it's night. The silence is heavy, as if even thoughts are whispering. I'm writing this so you don't repeat it. I used to confuse attraction with discomfort. I wanted so badly to feel alive that I ignored the signs. The adrenaline deceived me, and I believed that explosive chemistry was love. But deep down, there was a weariness, an insecurity that I couldn't recognize. I just wanted to belong, and the idea that someone cared made me dizzy with hope. We were at a party, the music loud, the lights dancing. He approached me, and the way he smiled made me feel butterflies, or so I thought. But every laugh came with a knot in my stomach, and I ignored it. After all, who doesn't want to feel desired? And then, the conversation flowed as if by magic. But there was something in the subtext that I didn't notice. He needed validation, and I couldn't see it. On another occasion, he made a comment, something that seemed like a joke, but had an undertone of control. Can you send me your location? He said it laughing, but the tension was there and I didn't see it. The chemistry was there, but along with it, there was a shadow of possessiveness, and I didn't realize. That was when I began to understand that those little rules were red flags, a hint of anxiety disguised as care. What seemed like affection was suffocating me. The last time we met, I felt lost. He expected me to reassure him, and when I couldn't, silence became one of our greatest enemies. Guilt weighed heavily, and confusion filled the air. And then, I realized I was trapped in a cycle. It sounded like love, but it meant doubt. It was as if every smile hid an expectation. I sought his approval in every gesture, in every whispered word. Moreover, I wanted to believe that he truly cared, that his concern was genuine. But there were moments when his gaze became a burden. The light would fade, and I saw myself reflected in his eyes, not as I really was, but as he wanted me to be. Then, the messages started coming in an unending stream. You left. Where are you? They weren't concerns. They were invisible chains that kept me tied to a version of myself that didn't exist. With every reply, a new demand would arise. The phone vibrating next to me while I tried to distract myself with friends, laughing and dancing. And there he was, the shadow that never left. I wanted to feel free, but the pressure kept my feet cemented to the ground. On one of those nights, during a conversation filled with forced laughter, he turned to me and said, "You know I only want what's best for you." It felt like a mantra, a line of defense that hid his insecurities behind a smile. How ironic. What was meant to be protection became a trap, and I didn't realize until the party ended. Everyone left, and we were alone, a deafening silence between us. The walls seemed to close in. He started to speak, his voice now heavy with frustration. "Why don't you tell me about your plans? You should trust me." Desperation took hold of him, and for a moment, I saw a spark of vulnerability. But that didn't make it love. It was disguised possession. When I tried to explain, the words got stuck in my throat, as if I were speaking a language he didn't understand. I want space. I need freedom. Each phrase was a distant echo, and the tension grew. He let out a bitter laugh, a hard expression on his face. "Do you think you can have freedom without risks?" And right then, I realized that the game had changed. Now we were adversaries in the battle for sanity. Deep down, the idea of being trapped terrified me, but the possibility of leaving him, of breaking free, felt even more frightening. The cycle kept turning, and I felt like a prisoner of my own choices. Every little warning sign I had ignored transformed into a deafening scream. Only then did I understand that what had sounded like affection truly meant control. In an act of rebellion, I decided to leave one day. One night without warning. Just me and my desire to breathe. The fresh air cut through the pressure of invasive thoughts, and for the first time, I allowed myself to live amidst the chaos. However, I soon realized that freedom was not something I could have without fighting for it. The guilt weighed on my shoulders like a heavy cloak, yet I pressed on. And then, a message came through. "Where are you? Have you forgotten about me?" My heart raced, but I knew I needed to learn to say no. I looked at my phone screen, and, instead of replying, I wrote a text that I never sent, with all my frustrations laid bare. "This isn't love. It's fear. I am not your property." But I deleted it. It was easier to keep up appearances. That's when I finally understood that true love is not the same as fear. It's a safe space that allows us to grow. Realizing this was both liberating and devastating at the same time. The pain of that realization left me shattered, but it also taught me to recognize the difference between genuine affection and disguised control. In the days that followed, the lessons were painful. Friends around me, full of advice. He doesn't deserve you. You need to value yourself. But the journey isn't simple. Learning to love yourself, to respect yourself, to say no. It felt like an internal struggle, but it meant making a conscious choice for protection. And then, with every step away, I was rebuilding myself. A fragment of strength here, another there. But it wasn't a heroic act. It was human, believing that I deserved a love where trust thrives, not a relationship dictated by rules. And I realized the signs had always been there, waiting for me to have the courage to see them. Dear daughter, if you ever find yourself at that crossroads, remember this. Love should be light, not a burden. If a smile brings weight, take a closer look. Because true freedom begins with your own voice, recognizing your limits. That's the truth I wish I'd understood sooner. As I walked through this new terrain of self-discovery, loneliness became my constant companion. Dealing with the scars from those relationships wasn't an easy task. The pain surfaced in moments of silence, where the echoes of unspoken words reverberated in my mind. I needed to understand that self-love doesn't come with a snap of the fingers. It's a slow growth, like a plant reaching for light. Once I met a friend at a cafe, and she was radiant, sharing about a new relationship. The expectation in her eyes gave me a pang. What I saw as happiness reflected the life I longed for, but it also stirred up a deep fear. What if I never found that? And so, instead of celebrating, I found myself submerged in an avalanche of insecurities. Smiling at her felt like a monumental effort. As I listened to her stories, my heart thumped hard in my chest. He's so caring, always concerned. A simple sentence, but it brought forth suffocating memories. Her words were like mirrors, reflecting a kind of love I once desired, but now realized was just a distant echo, distorted by possessiveness. That afternoon, the atmosphere in the cafe became heavy. I wanted to scream, to warn her about the invisible risks surrounding relationships like that one. But the truth was, I was still learning to stand up for myself, and I wasn't sure if my space was safe enough to hear my warnings. Instead, I chose to stay silent, swallowing the bitter truth. Over time, I began to care for myself differently. Lonely nights were filled with whispered conversations in the pages of my journal, where I bared my vulnerabilities without fear of judgment. Writing became a refuge. It was there that I could shout about what I had lived through, about the rules that had tried to shape my identity. Every word spilled out was like a step on an unknown yet essential path. And then, a realization struck. Often, the love we seek outside is the same that we need to cultivate within ourselves. I was forced to confront old beliefs. The idea that I didn't deserve to be idealized, that my voice didn't matter, began to unravel under the weight of new discoveries. With every page I wrote, with each new perception, I grew stronger. One night, while reminiscing about moments that left marks, I decided that I needed to face another crucial point: boundaries. Once, an ex-boyfriend reached out to me. He disguised his interest in reconnecting as a gesture of care, but the underlying tension was palpable. "You can always count on me," he said, and the phrase sounded like a warning to me. The old pattern echoed, concern masked as love. That impulse to respond and jump back into conversation was there, but I took a deep breath and wrote a message that I first drafted, naming all the buried feelings. "Thank you, but I don't want this anymore." The desire to please and avoid conflict battled against the need to assert my freedom. Instead of retreating, I pressed send. What I didn't expect was the wave of emotions that flooded over me. Guilt and doubt emerged like ghosts, trying to pull me back into the darkness. And then, I understood that this was an internal battle that I alone could win. It wasn't just a message sent. That was a declaration of independence, something I had never expressed before. The following days were turbulent, marked by intense mental unrest. It was a cycle of questions and challenges, but with that came clarity. Learning to say no was like reopening a wound that had long since healed. The pain was sharp, but essential. I needed to weather this storm. Slowly, solitude began to shift from being a burden to an opportunity to rediscover who I truly was. I started seeking safer spaces around me, surrounding myself with people who respected my boundaries. My friends, the ones who supported me, became pillars in my reconstruction. One day, looking in the mirror, I finally recognized the woman who was there. She was no longer just a shadow of the girl who sought validation. She was made of nuances, scars, and strength. With each imperfection, I saw the beauty in vulnerability. And then, I realized that true freedom begins when you choose to live your truth, even if it means confronting deep fears. Dear daughter, love should not demand sacrifices. It should not bind your wings. It should empower you, challenge you to be more than you think you are. When you notice the signs, when they present themselves as silences intertwined with possessiveness, listen. They are your inner voice trying to make itself heard. And in the end, always remember, love should not be a burden, but a lightness that propels us to soar. The city lights began to shine like distant stars as I walked the streets, finally alone. The silence that once felt oppressive now wrapped around me like a warm embrace. I was no longer seeking approval. I was seeking myself. But there was a new layer of vulnerability that I had yet to face. Then, his memory would come to me from time to time, like a shadow trying to infiltrate my mind. No matter how determined I was to move on, the echoes of that possession still gripped my heart. The idea of freedom was fascinating, yet terrifying. There was something seductive about its promises, even when the words turned out to be empty. The first time I went to a cafe alone, I felt the weight of others' gazes. A mix of expectation and insecurity flooded my mind. What are they thinking? That question echoed like a mantra. The truth is, for a long time, I had lived in the shadow of what others thought of me. Now I was there, trying to figure out who I really was. The waitress brought me a cappuccino and a slice of cake. As I watched the foam slowly dissolve, I realized that this moment was a gift. It was a pause to breathe, to reflect on the chaos I had lived through. But with each bite, an involuntary memory surfaced. The nights I eagerly awaited messages, anxious for a sign that I was enough. It was then that I saw a woman beside me. She was laughing on the phone, her eyes sparkling with genuine joy, a beam of light in a world that often seemed dark. An involuntary smile formed on my lips, a reflection of the human connection I longed for so deeply. And then, a disturbing thought emerged. I could be that woman too. I could laugh without fear, share moments without the need to hide anything. But the transition wasn't easy. When I started opening up to new friendships, every interaction carried the weight of my past experiences. One early morning, while chatting with a new friend about our dreams, the vulnerability became tangible. I've always thought I needed someone to complete me, I confessed, more to myself than to her. But now I see that maybe the path is the opposite. It's about finding myself completely. She smiled and nodded. Yeah, but it's hard, isn't it? Sometimes I feel like I'm wasting time when I should be loving someone. Her words echoed within me. The internal struggle was real, and I knew I wasn't alone in this battle. I decided I needed to explore this new phase more deeply. So, I began attending workshops on self-care and women's empowerment. The voices around me, filled with similar stories, created a safe space, a place where we could share our wounds without fear of judgment. Each story was like a thread intertwining with mine, forming a tapestry of resilience. At one of those gatherings, I met a woman who talked about self-love as a journey, not a destination. Her voice was strong yet sweet, and her gaze lit up the room. She shared her struggles, her failures, and how each fall brought her closer to herself. It was a moment of clarity. The idea that self-love wasn't a permanent state but a daily practice resonated within me like a bell, and I realized I could also be one of those women, one of them. And then, one day on my way home, I found a note on the ground. Someone had left a simple yet powerful message. "You are enough." That phrase echoed in my mind. I started collecting little notes that reminded me of my strength. Post-its on the wall, phrases written in a journal, each word becoming a mantra. As this new routine settled in, I realized that each friendship, each step I took to connect with other women, was an act of rebellion. I was challenging the past and its shadows. Love was no longer synonymous with pain. It was beginning to take shape as a safe and welcoming space. However, on some nights, loneliness still crept in, trying to envelop me in its cold embrace. I would sit in a corner of my room, pen in hand, writing about those tough moments. How many times did I still look at my phone, hoping for a message that wouldn't come? How many times did I daydream, imagining a reunion that no longer made sense? It was an exercise in liberation, and every tear shed was a part of me being released. Later, on one of those cloudy days, I saw a promotion for a self-discovery retreat. Something inside me sparked a flame. I needed this. Upon arriving, I realized that those women were like mirrors reflecting parts of me that I had yet to discover. Through activities and deep conversations, I understood that pain and joy coexist in the same space, and that's what makes us human. And then, a new feeling began to blossom. The acceptance that my story, with all its nuances, was a part of me. I left that retreat with a renewed determination. I would no longer be a hostage to my fears. Dear daughter, love should not be a burden, but a lightness that propels us to fly. If you ever feel trapped, remember there's a world out there waiting for you. Don't be afraid to explore. Don't be afraid to love, first and foremost, yourself. Every step on this journey will be an affirmation that you are indeed enough.